Of course, we know Penn State recruits Pennsylvania well. They get DC, Maryland, Virginia, the DMV. They've been doing really well in the Midwest. But the next group of prospects that are going to be important to Penn State's recruiting are going to come from the Southeast.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. My name is Zach Seyko. I am the host of the show, and I'm joined by Brian Smith, the National Recruiting Analyst for the Locked On Podcast Network. First-time guest on the show. Brian, thanks so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Penn State is one of the hottest teams on the recruiting trail.
Well, that's good to hear. Brian, before we really dive into everything, because we're going to get the national perspective. I mean, Penn State's basically targeting guys in every single region, but where can people keep up with what you do here on Locked On and all of your personal work?
Anything that I do on social media is going to have the same handle, FBScout_Florida. They have come across my screen quite a few times on Twitter. That's where I'm most prevalent, but I'm also on YouTube and Instagram. I live in Florida, and that's the state that the Nittany Lions have been hammering. Got a few commitments and got some more kids coming in for visits that I know a few of them we'll be talking about today.
Yeah, official visit season is underway. It's officially underway. And Penn State, the Northeast, the Southeast, over in Texas, I think you're obviously the national recruiting analyst here. So there's you have, Florida in the title here, but we're going to talk about so many different regions in this one episode. Brian, let's start with what Penn State is doing nationally, because before we even got this conversation started off the air, you were saying how unprecedented it was the way that Penn State is recruiting in Texas, in Florida, along the Midwest. What in your mind has led to Penn State's success with recruiting in this cycle and the cycles that are up ahead?
Effort. I mean, recruiting is about sacrificing your time. It is about finding all the little nuances that make you different when you send a kid a letter, when you send a kid a text, when you communicate with his coach, with his mother. It is all encompassing. I speak to college coaches and high school coaches and recruits all over the South and Texas, etc. I haven't heard anything bad about Penn State, and they're constantly at practices. One of my buddies in the recruiting industry was recently at a major practice, and two Penn State coaches were there. It was in South Florida. They're very prevalent, obviously, in the Midwest and in the East because that's where they're located. But when you can add kids from Florida, that changes your roster. They have a major visit coming up with Jonte Waller, maybe the best player in the state of Mississippi. When has Penn State recruited Mississippi? To my knowledge, never. That is effort. And then Texas and on into California, they've got a junior college kid from California coming in. That is effort. So you have to give credit to the entire Nittany Lions staff, because even if you're assigned to a specific area, it takes a staff effort to make that work overall. And they're about as well organized a recruiting machine as there is in the country right now.
I think you got to give a lot of credit to J1 Seider. Of course, his roots are in Florida, right?
That is correct.
And he's one of the best recruiters in the country. I think some sites have him top 5 at a very minimum. But
yeah, I agree.
I think we're in the same mindset here that he could be the best. And it's why so many Florida kids are coming. Because I do find it a little strange. You're going to trade the palm trees in Florida. And this is something Coach Seider has said as well after practice, just talking to the media. He said, the weather, it started when spring ball kicked off. He said the weather's starting to feel a lot more like home, just kind of alluding that Florida's always so nice year round and Pennsylvania can be a little treacherous with the temperatures. But it's the fact that, yes, these Florida kids are trading the palm trees to come up to icy cold Penn State, especially when it comes to November, December during the football season. So what is that a testament to J1 Seider as a recruiter and getting the message across to these kids to come to Penn State?
I think it's more effort. That's the first thing, but it's also his relationships. He's, I believe, from Broward County, which is the Fort Lauderdale, Miami area. And everybody I talk to, because I've asked about him specifically with multiple people, they just like the guy. if you like the coach, and believe me, this is important. The coaches, it doesn't matter what state, Florida just being one, but if the coaches at these schools don't like a program or don't like a coach, that is not good for business. Yeah. They will go out of their way to influence the players they have. That's just facts. That's never going to change. He doesn't have that problem. They go the other direction for him. So he's done something right. And he knows some of them too, because he grew up there. But at the same time, it doesn't mean you have to like the guy. He's putting in effort. He's showing that he's trying to get these kids a degree. Penn State's obviously a very good school. So it's something different. And I think a lot of the Florida kids want to see something different. And as you alluded to, I mean, Penn State's at the bottom of some mountains. It's about as far away in terms of the entire terrain and the culture and the weather as you can get from South Florida. But the kids want to see something different now. And he's kind of picked an interesting area, because the South Florida kids used to never really want to leave the South. Mm-hmm. And now that's just polar opposite. It's changed, the internet and everything else. And he's found his niche, and they are killing it. So hats off to him for finding ways to get kids interested. And he does it early. They'll offer kids in like their sophomore year if they like them. They don't hesitate. And then they'll continue to recruit them on through, and it makes a difference because the kids build those relationships. So hats off to him.
I think I found that interesting. I think that across the board, whether it's Coach Seider or Coach Poindexter, this starts, of course, with James Franklin, the head coach. But yes, Penn State does get in at the ground level when it comes to these recruits, and a lot of them skyrocket up the rankings as the process, of their high school career goes on. But Penn State is good at assessing talent early, and I think that's just part of the recruiting game. They know that they're going to, in order to compete with the likes of Georgia, LSU, I'll lump them in there, Alabama, particularly SEC schools, if they're going to go up against them, they're going to have to beat them to the punch, and that's what they've done thus far.
I think that it's the only way you're going to consistently win, especially like in the backyard of Georgia. Mm-hmm. The only teams that really beat them for recruits in the state, any consistency, would be Clemson and Alabama. It's not real shocking because they're about the same distance away for kids. If you're going to come down there and pick off a few kids from Florida State, from Georgia, Alabama, you got to get in there early and you've got to outwork them. It's just old-fashioned effort. So Penn State's done it, though. Again, it's not normal to see them getting kids like from Mississippi and Texas and stuff to visit. And these aren't just random guys. Javonte Waller is arguably a top 5 national pass rusher, and he's from the middle of nowhere in Mississippi. That is not a fit traditionally for Penn State recruiting. And I'm being extremely kind. But to put it in perspective, Steve Wiltfong, who knows recruiting pretty well, he's director of recruiting for 247, thinks that Penn State's the likely leader. Even if they're in that conversation right now, that's absurd, because like out of his top 10, they were the only school not in the SEC. What does that tell you? That's amazing. It's amazing.
Everything we didn't know. And that's just one of the many important prospects they have coming up. Of course, it's official visit season. Brian, let's talk about some of those important prospects. What region in particular you think Penn State can have the most persuasion, if you will, when it comes to recruiting over the summer for the upcoming class? But before we get to that, let's hear from our sponsor of today's episode, and that is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs. Of course, the finals are here, because right now new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is right, $1,000 in bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Get great promotions every day. It's a safe and secure app when you download the FanDuel Sportsbook app, and you get paid instantly. That's my favorite feature. There's no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. And thanks again for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. Locked On Nittany Lions is your go-to podcast for Penn State rivals. Visit happyvalleyinsider.com. Of course, you're going to get the latest recruiting news there. You're going to get it right here with Brian Smith from the Locked On Podcast Network itself. First-time guest, I can't wait to continue to do this and get these updates over the course of official visit season and over the summer, because there's no football being played, but this is the long game that you have to play so that the results translate into the fall. Brian, let's resume with that topic going into the second segment. The most important names that Penn State is targeting, just maybe a handful of them, because I know they got dozens of visits lined up for Friday, June 2nd.
Sure.
They've got dozens of visits lined up for Friday, June 9th. I'm not saying, because in every recruit, the ones that are verbally committed, the ones that are still, well, Penn State's in my top 10, top 5. Let's stick with the uncommitted ones.
I would say the most unique kid, and I'll go local, he's greater Philadelphia area, is Malachi Williams.
Yeah.
He's a raw pass rusher that has kind of blown up on the recruiting scene. He's way underrated by most of the services right now. He needs to add some weight, but he's extremely twitchy, 6'3", 215, 220. And if you can get pass rushers locally, because they're the hardest thing to get other than corners, you got to grab them. He's got offers from numerous programs like Notre Dame and on down all the Midwest powers, etc. That's a kid they got to get. He's coming in on the 9th. A kid down in my neck of woods that is blown up too is Jameer Grimsley, a very long corner. He's at least 6'2". He's out of Catholic in Tampa. That's a kid they're in the top group for. Florida and Clemson and all kinds of programs are after him. He has the swag. He has the size. He has the things that you need to compete against Ohio State on the edge. And let's be honest, Ohio State's the class of the Big Ten, and the reason is their wide receiver group. If you're going to compete with them, you need corners. And this is a kid they can try to get a third corner. They already got 2 committed from the state of Florida. But he could play receiver. He could play safety. He can play whatever he wants. He's a freak of nature. He's also coming in on the 9th. And then the kid, I'm just going to mention him again. Pass rushers, you can never have enough. Waller. He's the kid from Mississippi. This is a loaded class in Mississippi, and I think he's the best player in the state. So do several other people, too, that are college coaches. Their opinion matters more than me. If they can get him, it changes your class. He is an edge guy with some power, but he's also twitchy enough to run around somebody that's going to play in the NFL and get a sack. That's a starting list, but I mean, the Pennsylvania kids, the Maryland kids, the Virginia kids, they'll probably make more decisions early. Anybody they're bringing in the first 2 weekends from those areas, I like their chances. Penn State's always recruited like the 757 in Virginia very, very well. Paterno and on down the line, any coach they've had. Look for any of those kids that they can turn it up and get a commitment. I also think that Franklin and his staff will probably steal somebody from out west, but we'll see. But right now, I'm focused on the Southern kids because I know they're going to do well in the Midwest, in the Atlantic area. That's Penn State's home ground. If they can steal some of these Southern kids, look out.
Any of those names, even the one, Ed, from a relationship standpoint, because those are the most important in terms of on-field production, right? You want to get the best prospects. You want to get the top guys in the state. But some of them, Penn State might be on the outside looking in. So they're in the top 5, but they might be 4th or 5th on the list for some. Do you know of any that have a really good relationship with Penn State and that they should be considered the first or second choice when it comes to some of these top recruits anywhere?
Liam Andrews is a possibility. The offensive lineman, he's from Massachusetts. That's a kid that they should, they should always be, if they want, they should always be in the mix for a kid from the Boston area, Connecticut, stuff like that, state of New York. DeJuan Lane's an interesting player. He's a recruit that a lot of teams want. Penn State's involved heavily with him. He's out of the Gilman School in Maryland. He could go to numerous programs. Notre Dame and several others really want him. The kid that I'm not sure if they're top 2, but everybody seems to want him now, and it's one of the more fascinating recruitments in the country, is Chris Cole out of Virginia. It's one of those kids that they've been in on for a long time. Yeah. Here's your little note for the day for anybody out there that likes pop culture. He is the grandson of Bob Marley. Yeah, that's just random as all get out. But his uncle played at Miami, Rohan, but he's Penn State, Notre Dame, Miami. He's got list all over Alabama, and everybody's recruiting him. He's an athletic, big safety, smaller linebacker that can really run. I think he's a national top 100 kid, and he's a bit underrated. The kid I'm looking for that I think they've got a chance to get a commitment from is Jalen Harvey. He's out of Maryland. That's prime Penn State territory. And he's a defensive guy, another edge guy. He could grow into a strong side end. He's not the tallest kid, but he plays with a ton of effort. And those are the kind of guys that have always made Penn State successful on defense. So 6'2", 240, 230, somewhere in that range. I really like Harvey a lot.
You bring up Liam Andrews as the first guy. This is just something off the top of my mind, something a little off script in terms of the notes I have for this show, Brian, is the fact that Penn State has had so many offensive line commits over just the past few cycles here. Of course, that's a testament to Phil Troutwine and James Franklin saying we got to compete with Michigan to have the best. And same thing with Ohio State, right? To counter those wide receivers, let's go get the guys in the secondary. To counter Michigan, let's play mano-a-mano and have our offensive line beefed up. Penn State has a lot of commitments for the offensive line. I guess you can say never have too many here, but at some point, there's 5 starting offensive linemen. For Liam Andrews or anybody else that they're recruiting that is a potential offensive line target, at some point, does Penn State have to put a cap on that? They can't have 6 or 7 in a class, or can they?
Well, you could. I've had some discussions with coaches about this and other recruiting analysts. Sometimes you can't even remotely worry about the transfer portal anymore. And I'll give you an example. Every year, Ohio State takes one of the top 10 quarterbacks in the country. Well, how many quarterbacks really play in a game? One. They know kids are going to transfer. They're just at the point, they're like, screw it. It just, whoever wins the job wins the job. They're going to lose a quarterback pretty much every single year to the portal. Now, that's the most important position, so I can gravitate to understanding that. O-line's a little different. It's because it takes so long to develop. It's also like quarterback. It's about numbers. You want to be right around 15 or 16 on scholarship for any given program. And Penn State's trying to beef up and get more athletic and all that. Gerby Lambert and several other guys are recruiting. Liam Andrews. They're all great prospects.
Yeah, they are.
But do you really care if somebody gets beat out, no matter what their recruiting ranking is? I mean, Liam Andrews could be a bust too. I mean, does he put in the work and all that once he gets to college? He goes to Michigan, he goes to Penn State, whatever. That's the point. Especially O-line, it is incredibly difficult to project who's going to get it because it's more about technique than it is athleticism. At corner, this is not a lie. I will consistently have a pretty good idea of a grade of a kid at corner after 3 or 4 reps of their film because it's so much more about his physical skill than anything else. O-line is polar opposite. So you can't really grade O-linemen in high school the way we would like because they're often just murdering some kid that's half their size. They haven't been coached as well, etc. And Penn State knows this too. So does every other program, Georgia, everybody. You take as many as you can, and if a few fall by the wayside, so be it. Transfer portal is there for a reason. So, Penn State will be okay if they take maybe 6 this year. Maybe they just take 3 next year. You got to get the best players.
Again, Locked On Nittany Lions is your go-to podcast for Penn State rivals. Visit happyvalleyinsider.com for all the latest. In this final segment, let's just kind of set a checklist for Penn State, Brian, figuring out the biggest goals that they might have. Is it to land a select number of kids out of a region? Is it to land a particular position? Of course, wide receiver comes to mind, right? With the change, bringing in Marcus Haggins. Virginia, long time, of course, born and raised, and then played, coached, everything. And they still don't have a wide receiver commit. Now they're gaining some interest. They have guys who are committed to Ohio State, just one in particular, right? But if you had to give, if you have to give Penn State maybe 2 or 3 goals, a checklist that they need to accomplish over the summer to say, from a national recruiting standpoint, hey, Penn State is on the ball. They're going to stay in the top 10 for the class of 2024 rankings, or even if it is branching out into the class of 2025, seeing if they can land a kid earlier in that phase as well. They already have just a few, but it's always good to start early, and that's what Penn State does. But for you, what is that checklist of maybe 2 or 3 things Penn State needs to do in this time frame to say, hey, we had a great summer when it comes to recruiting?
Well, you got to get a few commitments. I mean, especially with the kids, again, in the Northeast, Maryland, et cetera. You need, could you get DeJuan Lane to commit? Or, if you can get a surprise like Chris Cole or something, that's great. But get the guys you should get first. That's number one. You can't lose those, especially since most of those guys, if Penn State doesn't get them, there's a good chance you're going to be playing against them because it's going to be Michigan, Michigan State, Pittsburgh, et cetera. You don't want to play against the same guys that you wanted. 2, you've got to protect your home. And, Michigan, Ohio State, and several schools have done a good job, to be honest, over the last decade of recruiting the state of Pennsylvania. Keep some of those kids home. And then finally, it's about the positions we've been talking about. Do they get an edge guy this summer? They're recruiting the heck out of some really good ones. Yeah. I mean, I don't know which one will pop, but they need a couple at least in this class. So if they could get at least one of them this summer, and then finally, your last point, they need a big play receiver. Do I think they're going to get Jeremiah Smith? Absolutely not. I would be shocked. I know him well. But if you're bringing him on campus, it's better than not. So they're bringing him. They're bringing Chance Robinson. Again, the Seider is a tremendous recruiter, and those are Fort Lauderdale area kids. So they've got to get somebody from somewhere that's a big play receiver, whether it's now in the summer or this fall. This class will not be complete without a truly impact receiver for the Nittany Lions.
And Nick Marsh comes to mind. That's my favorite. Do you have any insight on him? Because I really want I don't know. I've heard Calvin Johnson. I've heard Calvin Johnson thrown around as a comparison. Crazy enough.
That's not fair. That's not fair.
I've heard it.
I'll falsify that. I'm not going in that. He's one of the 2 best prospects at receiver I've ever seen, along with another guy named Randy Moss. So no, I don't see that. But
if we have to, let's finish with Nick Marsh. Do you think that he's going to stay with Michigan State? Do you think he flips over to Michigan? Does Penn State have a good relationship with him? Where could Nick Marsh end up?
Anywhere. His recruitment is all over the map. This is one of those you got to kind of let the recruitment play out and let the visits dictate the tale. Michigan State still really wants him. He committed once, he could commit again. But that's usually not the trend, and Penn State is much hotter on the trail than them. Michigan State's in a bit more disarray. I mean, they just had their quarterback leave and transfer to Auburn. That's random.
Yeah.
I'm a little nervous about what's going on in Michigan State. So I don't know where he's going to go, but that would be my least likely pick if I had to guess.
Okay.
And Penn State's just the opposite. They need receivers. They're the hotter program. They've got Drew Aller on campus. There are reasons to think Penn State's right there. So now it's just, how does he like to visit? He's a Detroit area kid. So let's see how that plays out.
Well, they have Kalen and Kobe King in the fold. Maybe they can do again from the Michigan area. So maybe they can help in that recruiting process for someone like Nick Marsh. Brian, this was great. I had a lot of fun. Hopefully we can do this again very soon and coordinate this again. Before I let you go, where can people keep up with what you do for the Locked On Podcast Network and everything you do personally?
At FB Scout _Florida, whether it's YouTube, Twitter, or Instagram. I've even got a TikTok account that I use a little bit. I'm always talking recruiting in some way, shape, or form. Mostly kids from down south, but there's going to be some national stuff at the end of this month after all the ruffling of the feathers happens with the visits. Talk a little bit more big picture. Penn State will definitely be in that. So find me at FB Scout _Florida on Twitter. That's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Brian, thanks for the time. Can't wait to do this again.
All right, buddy. You have a great day.